It's amazing how unreal or seemingly unreal I tend to, appear to some people, you know. But I want to let you know today that I am a person. I have my own preferences, my own biases, you know. I've got, things that I gravitate towards. I've got things I've got strengths, you know, also, and I'm a full-fledged person, living life, enjoying life, and also participating in all of life, in the fullness that life is, in that sense, what we describe as life or what we refer to as life, our experiences and all of that, right? And I'm here today uh, to share some part of my story, and this is in correspondence to some things I shared in the last video, which was from that place of realization of, of how vulnerable I needed to be, right? So, months ago, when I got back, on social media platforms, and I just felt like, okay, let me start sharing some things and all of that. You know, the first response I got, like an intuition or the voice of the spirit within that I got was that I needed to be vulnerable. And when that came to me, right, I knew what it would entail. I knew it was going to mean that I was going to start sharing some part of me like this, you know, that I would rather keep to a certain people, you know. And I negotiated with that. I negotiated with that direction, with that intuition for months, right? And but some days ago, it just really dawned on me that I needed to do this because it was starting to create, some kind of veil. Not that it started creating some kind of veil, but it had, it had created this veil, right? So whenever I speak or whenever I share or whenever I just do, you know, what I really resonate with, you know, I'm not really like fetching from my depth, right? It's like I'm not fetching from the depth of Bolu. So certain things tend to lack, some authority. They tend to lack some depth, you know. Yeah. And when I mean depth, I'm not talking about the bigness of the word. I'm talking about the impact of the word, right? Yeah. So this video is the first installment, of sharing about myself, right? And yeah, so I am Bolu Daviyd, right? So let me start with this. I was born. I was born. So I don't know where I was born, right? I thought I knew, and not until last year that I discovered that my parents were not actually, my birth parents. And imagine I discovered this last year. you know, I got to know that, the people I grew up with, people who raised me, were not actually my birth parents. And I thought it would be easier than this. But yeah, so I discovered they were not actually my birth parents, and discovered that, my birth parents were actually or are actually alive, but not married to each other, they're married to separate persons and they live in separate parts of the country. And that started changing, you know, certain narratives and certain stories I grew up with about myself. So it was like in an instant, all of the stories you believed about yourself, just came falling apart, right? And at that point, there was a tendency actually to start questioning even your identity and the things you have held on to and the things you have, defined yourself after, right? But I didn't feel much of that because, I didn't feel much of that because of this, right? Because of what I'm about to say, right? I felt, in quotes, vindicated because a lot of things have been happening in my life that made me feel as though I was rebellious, I was a black sheep, that made me feel as though I was possessed, or I was just being unreasonable and had some mental conditions. This actually feels harder than I thought it would be because the whole fiber of my being can actually vibrating. Oh, yeah. So I felt, for lack of, a better word right now, I felt a bit vindicated, and because there were things I knew, not because someone sat down to tell me about it, but I just knew things I shouldn't have known. You get, I was seemingly the firstborn, right, of my parents, that I grew up with. But, it didn't feel that way, even though the pressure of the firstborn was there. And in fact, I came to a point where I told my mom then, my mom is passed now, that's, my mom who raised me. I told her then, I said to her that, my sister, who is supposed to be the second born, I told her that my sister is the firstborn. And I told my sister that she is the firstborn. Just imagine, seemingly out of the blues, you coming to tell your sister you are the firstborn. So you need to take care of the family now, or you need to, all of those talks. And then you go to your mom to also tell your mom the same thing, that, okay, my sister, I don't want to mention her name, she's the firstborn, all of that. But even at that point, my mom couldn't say anything, right? And it's funny because I didn't hear all of that from my mom last year. I heard it from my dad, and also my birth dad. I thought my birth dad was just an uncle, who just tend to love the family. I grew up, recognizing him as an uncle, never knowing it was actually my dad. It was actually my birth dad. Right. So, whew. I need to take a break.